So I'm gonna go ahead and hit record. So hello everyone, welcome to Science of. This is going to be our final one for this season. We will start again in July, but just letting everybody know it's already been 6 weeks, which has flown by. We started at the end of January and hello, it's March. So we're gonna go ahead and talk about salamanders today, which is a little bit different from earthworms. We did last week, and we've done some animal teeth, and we talked about rodents. So it's a little, tried to pick some good different topics. So like I mentioned today, if you stick around, we do have some friends that will be joining us. I won't tell you what yet, but we will invite them over to the screen here at kind of towards the end. So like I said, my name is Monica. I am the Wildlife Education Specialist with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. I usually have a moderator, so I apologize that I don't have one today. We were at an all-staff division meeting at a state park here, and I had to get out of it and rush back here to do this program. So I'm without a moderator today, so please still feel free to ask questions in the chat. I will get to them. There's some breaks that are between some of the topics, and then normally what we do is answer questions towards the end. So hang in there with me. I'm doing it on my own today, and I will still let people in as we're talking too. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. We're gonna be talking about salamanders today, which I think a lot of people kind of know what salamanders are, but they might not know really about them or know that there's different types of salamanders, depending on where you're joining us from today. I don't know if we have anyone from Missouri today. You guys are pretty lucky. You have like 20 species of salamanders. We have 2. So a little different, but we do have 2 amazing salamanders. This photo that I have on here is actually one that we do have in Nebraska. You might have recognized it. It's a barred tiger salamander, which we will talk about later. So we are pretty fortunate as far as amphibians, but I would always love some more salamanders. So we're going to talk a little bit about salamanders today. Just letting everyone know, if you've joined us before, you know the idea here, but please use the chat to ask questions about the topic at hand and be nice to everybody and do encouragements, and we won't have any issues at all. All right, and again, for those of you that haven't joined us, I am by no means an expert. I would consider myself way more knowledgeable when it comes to salamanders than things like earthworms like last week, but I do a lot of research for this, and my job title is conveying those messages. So our biologists are on the ground. They're very good at interacting with those species and getting that information, and my job is to take that information and make it accessible for the public. So that is what we're doing today. If you ask me a question that I don't understand or don't know how to answer, I will find someone that can, and I will certainly get back to you. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what salamanders are. So salamanders are amphibians. They are not lizards. They are not reptiles. They are in the order Caudata, which is Latin for tailed. So if you ever see a salamander, they should have a tail, unless they've lost it for some reason. We'll talk about that, but they are tailed. They are also, overall, that class, they are amphibians. So there's salamanders, there's frogs and toads, and then there's something called caecilians. So those are the 3 kind of overarching types of amphibians. Salamanders are just one of those orders that we have. Overall, in that order, we have about 740-ish species worldwide of salamanders. And one of the main characteristics that is different between them and things like frogs and toads and things like caecilians is that they have tails as adults. So if you find an adult form, they should have a tail. So within that Caudata order, there are 10 families. So this just basically breaks those salamanders down into certain characteristics that they have that others might not. So this includes things like your newts, your true salamanders, things like hellbenders. There's things called mudpuppies, sirens, and we'll talk about a few of these families later on today. Also, most salamanders are going to occur in fresh water and also those damp woodlands. Most of the time, you're going to find them in the temperate regions of the northern hemisphere. So if you find something that looks pretty much like a salamander, but you're not in those areas, it could be a lizard. If it has scales on it, it is a lizard. But if it has those really smooth, moist skin, that's going to be your salamanders. So overall, they look like a cross between a frog and a lizard. And if you look at this photo and you're familiar with frogs, you kind of hold your eye over the tail and just look at the face, it's a frog. I don't know how better to describe it, but it's a frog. And then also when you look at the back, they have these kind of long, slender bodies, and they also have toes, but no claws. So if you're not sure, is this a lizard or is this a salamander? Lizards are going to have claws, and salamanders do not. Most salamanders in the world have 4 legs. Not all of them. There's always exceptions. Some have 2, and some even have these things called vestigial legs, which are mainly useless, but they still have them, and we'll talk about those today as well. Salamanders also have moist, smooth, permeable skin. So that simply means that they can absorb and exchange gases and carbon dioxide and minerals and vitamins through the water through their skin. Their glands on their skin will keep it moist, and so they produce mucus. They often have long tails, and they vary widely in the colors and patterns. There are some that are very earthy and camouflage to their environment, and then there are some that are brightly colored and bold patterned. There are also some that have lungs as an adult and some that don't have lungs. So salamanders widely vary within those 740 different types of species. All right, so where did salamanders come from? Well, there was a group of scientists, this was fairly recent, about 2014, 2015. They found these fossils in Portugal, and they did some DNA analysis and they did some tests on it, and they found that this is probably one of the main salamander ancestors. So they called it the Metamorphosis algaverensis, and that's very hard to say. So super salamander is what they called it, kind of the common name. It is a super salamander, and this is a photo of it here on the right. They lurked in the waters at the time, well, what is now Europe, I guess, when the Earth had all the continents together in that Pangea. Over time, they broke apart. So they found these fossils in Portugal. They estimated this animal to be about 2 meters long, and they weighed as much as the average human, which could be anywhere from 140 to about 170 pounds. Their head, as you can see in this photo, was super flat and wide. And if you look all the way from like the tip of the nostrils to like the shoulders, where the shoulders would be, it's huge. It was about the size of a coffee table. And they had hundreds of piercing teeth. And then the jaws, they were also hinged together at the back, and they snapped down kind of like a toilet seat. So this animal, they believe, is pretty much the ancient relative of today's amphibians. So especially our salamanders. So we believe that it ate things like fish and other invertebrates, but they would not be surprised if it also ate smaller dinosaurs and mammals. So over time, when Pangea kind of broke apart, the climate changed, it got warmer, it got colder, and they ruled for millions of years. But when that climate changed, that fire and ice came, they couldn't hack it anymore. And so over time, they were decimated. But pretty much this article and these couple of journals that I read, people are like happy that they're not around anymore, because if the volcanoes did not kill them off, the super salamanders, we probably would not be here today, because they would be one of our predators. All right, and there was another study that I was looking at as how these salamanders became so variable. So basically this group of scientists, they took micro or very, very small CT scans of 148 different salamanders' skulls. And then they found what they call these landmarks, these special categories or these special areas within their skull. They made 1,000 different landmarks in the study. Overall, what they found is that metamorphosis has a huge impact on that salamander evolution. So metamorphosis is just simply them going from an egg to a juvenile to an eft to an adult. So them making their life cycle. Basically, it showed that evolution and the increasing in the different types of feeding and their different types of anatomy, they led to a very rapid evolution, and they changed a lot. So finally, when they did this study, they saw that the different life cycles they believe evolved about 11 different times. So that's quite a few for salamanders. And that's why they think we have such a wide range and variety of our salamanders. All right, so that was just a little information about what our salamanders are, how they came to be. Yes, thank you, someone, for saying that means no tails. Good. So our caudata means tailed, and anurans, that means no tail. Good. Thank you for doing that. All right, so I do want to talk a little bit about the different families that are in salamanders, again, because they're so diverse, and just kind of the different aspects and characteristics that they have. There are 10 of them, but I'm not going to go through all of them today. Just kind of going to go through the ones that I thought were really cool or really different. All right, so I didn't give you a size on how normal salamanders are. The ones that you find in Nebraska, anywhere from 4, maybe 7, 8 inches long, depending on the tail. That's about as big as they get here in Nebraska. But there are these things called giant salamanders. So they're in the family Cryptobranchidae, which is the giant salamanders, and then the Hinobiidae, which are these Asiatic salamanders. The 3 species I really want to focus on are the Chinese giant salamander, the Japanese giant salamander, and then the hellbender. So one of these species, the hellbender, you might have heard about because you can find them in the US. There's a lot of conservation work going on with them because they are an endangered and threatened species with here in the United States. All of these are born in the water, and they spend the life in the water. So these are one of those animals that do not go on land. In Nebraska, our salamanders start in the water and then become mostly terrestrial. These guys are huge. They can grow up to about 6 feet in length and weigh about 50 pounds. They have these really big, broad, flat heads, and then tails that look more like an eel. And then if you look on this photo, between their 2 legs, you notice these like loose flaps of skin. These really help the animals breathe. So their skin is filled with all of these blood vessels that are only 1 cell thick. So it allows that oxygen from the water to pass directly from the water and into that salamander's blood. So it's very efficient when they breathe. Also, these guys will mainly eat things like crustaceans, fish, worms, insect larvae, sometimes small mammals, and then toads and tadpoles. All the time when I mention hellbenders, people ask, well, where'd they get that name? And I was like, I don't know if I really know. So I looked it up, and it seems that when people first discovered these animals, when they picked them up, they did like this wiggling, crazy, wavy motion, and people thought that they were experiencing at the time the tortures of hell, so they called them hellbenders. So the name just kind of stuck, and it's a pretty cool name, I think. All right, so those are your giant salamanders, and then we have these things called mole salamanders. So the 2 species of salamander that we have here in Nebraska, this is what we have. We have mole salamanders. So the Ambiostomatidae, they're called mole salamanders because they're mostly nocturnal, and during the day they spend the time in leaf litter or burrows. And then this is the only species that is found only in North America, so no other place within the world. They have very small eyes, they have stout bodies, they have super smooth skin. And if you look on this photo, again, between the front legs and the back legs, you notice some lines and some ridges, the vertical. These will increase the surface area and create channels for water to flow through. So it's a great way for them to breathe. In the early spring, these salamanders will often move to ponds and streams to breed. They lay eggs in clumps, and then over time, the young will live in the water, and they have external gills, just like fish do. And then over time, when they metamorphosis or they change into an adult, they will lose their gills, most of them do, and move on to land. There are still some that do not. All right. All right, so this is a kind of a different one. A lot of people would not ever say this is a salamander. They're called Amphiumas. So the family Amphiumidae, sometimes they're referred to things like Congo eels. So there's only 3 species in this whole family, and they have these tiny little legs up here where, I don't know, you assume where their ears would be, these tiny little kind of looking spur things. These are their legs. They're fairly useless. They're called vestigial legs. They don't really use them for anything. They're just kind of there. Scientists believe that maybe in 100 million years or another million years, they won't even have them at all. They're pretty much useless. One thing that's really neat about these animals is that scientists have done a lot of DNA checks on them and a lot of studies. And what they found is that there are some scientists that think there's animals that are a little bit more primitive or what they call less advanced. And then there's some people that call them more advanced animals. So something like a mammal would be considered fairly advanced. And then something like a Amphiuma would be less advanced. Well, for this animal, what they have found is that people call it a less advanced animal. They have about 70 times more DNA than something more advanced, like a duck. So a lot of people think, you know, they can fly, like ducks, they can fly, they have different habitats. They seem like more an advanced animal. They have less DNA, 70 times less more than these guys. So these guys have a ridiculous amount of DNA, which is very interesting compared to other salamanders. They also have a lateral line, which is if you're familiar with fish, you know, this is how they sense the water. These guys, they lay their eggs in wet mud, and the female will actually remain coiled around her eggs until they hatch. So these animals are showing parental care, which is different than a lot of other amphibians and even some reptiles. The larvae, for the most part, they have external gills, but they do disappear and the lungs take over. But they do retain one set of gill slits, which are fully functioning internal gills. So one could say that these animals have incomplete metamorphosis. So like a butterfly will go completely from a caterpillar to an adult. These guys do not have complete, they have incomplete. And then these guys are found pretty much in the southeastern part of the United States. All right, so there's also these things called Olms, Waterdogs, Mudpuppies. A lot of people have asked us, do we have Mudpuppies in Nebraska, or are they the same thing as salamanders? The answer is both no. We don't have them in Nebraska, and they are very different than the mole salamanders that we have here in Nebraska. So this is your family Proteidae. There's 6 species that occur. One of them is in Europe, and then the rest are here in North America. But basically, metamorphosis does not occur. So they do not change into an adult. They remain fully aquatic. So they're pedomorphic, which simply means they retain juvenile characteristics. So they keep things that younger animals would have. So mud puppies are mostly found in limestone caves. They lose most of their eyesight because it's dark in a cave and they don't really need to see, but they do have some retinal simplification in the European species. They do have parental care, but again, it's very much like those Amphiumas. They kind of just watch the eggs and that's about it. They don't teach them how to drive or anything like that. The larvae take several years to reach maturity, which is different than, again, a lot of our salamanders. And they feed, again, on things like that are in caves. So bacteria, protozoans, slime, as well as invertebrates and other fish. All right, sirens. So family Sirenidae. These look very similar to your Amphiumas, but if you notice in the photo, they have a little bit more long legs here in the front. So they only have 2 legs. I know it's kind of hard to see in the photo. It's pretty dark, but these guys are neotenic. So this means that the larva will mature into a reproductive stage, but they don't go through the normal process of metamorphosis. For a land-based adult, it's a little bit different. So they have very small forelimbs. They have external gills that are really bunched together, kind of up by where their neck would be. They're only found in the southeastern United States and parts of northern Mexico. These guys are primarily carnivorous, but they are one of the only species of salamanders that has been observed eating plant material, which is strange because no other salamanders will do that. Most people think when they see them that they're eels. These guys have a really cool adaptation that if it's really dry where they are, they will actually shrink their gills to these little stumps, and they will make this mucus cocoon and burrow into the mud and encase themselves in this mucus to keep moist over time until it is better environments, until it rains or until the waters fill up. And they do have external fertilization, and males of the species will actually build nests for their offspring, which again is a weird thing because a lot of reptiles and amphibians don't have that parental care. All right. So there's newts and then true salamanders. So this is the family Salamandridae, which is very confusing because true salamanders, technically they're all salamanders, but these are true salamanders and newts. So there is a difference between a newt and a salamander. These guys will lack those costal grooves that help them breathe. Their skin is glandular because they are poisonous. So most of these guys, they have movable eyelids, which a lot of people think that's why they're lizards, because lizards can move their eyes and they have those eyelids. And then nearly every species in this family, almost all of them, they can produce a toxin. Some are very deadly. So this tetrodotoxin is one of the most toxic non-protein substance that is known. And this photo here is actually of something called a rough-skinned newt. It is the most poisonous newt in all of these salamanders. What's kind of neat is that this animal, where it is found in the US, it is around a lot of garter snakes. And it's kind of been this evolutionary arms race because the newt is toxic. And so if the garter snake goes to eat it, it would usually die. But over time, they have developed almost an immunity and a resistance to that toxin. So then the newt will become more toxic and evolve more toxin, and then the garter snake will develop more resistance. So it's kind of like this arms race of who can be the better predator and who can be the better prey. These guys will also have those 4 limbs. They have 4 toes on the front, 5 in the back. They reproduce via internal fertilization. So that's a little different than the ones that are external. Some of these species, they will even skip the egg laying phase and they will just give birth to live young, which is some frogs will also do that. And then many females can even store that sperm for up to about 6 months. So if conditions aren't right and it's not a good time to have babies, she can hold off and then store that sperm for about 6 months. All right, and then you have your lungless salamander. So this is your family Plethodontidae. There's about 370 species. So this is the largest family of salamanders, and they are very dependent on this stuff they breathe through their skin. So it's called cutaneous respiration. They're mostly found in the Americas, Canada, and sometimes even in the Amazon basin. And they have a mucous membrane in their mouth and throat that has to be wet at all times in order to absorb that oxygen. Because remember, they're lungless. They don't have lungs to breathe like normal other salamanders. But they do also have this pair of what's called nasolabial grooves. Basically what this is, it's a vertical slit from the nostril to the upper lip, and it is lined with glands and enhances the salamander's smell. And this is very much needed because that is how they communicate and they find directions to their food and even for that courtship display. They feed on a variety of invertebrates, sometimes even smaller salamanders. They're fully aquatic and they're entirely terrestrial. Some are semi-burrowing, some are arboreal. So it's a very, very large family and very diverse. All right, so that was a lot of information about as far as types of salamanders. I'm gonna really quick check the chat here. A lot of cool. Someone said, is there a specific advantage for these guys to lose their legs, the Amphiumas? Great question. They simply just do not need them anymore. One of the things they believe that snakes, over time, they became burrowers. They basically got in the way and they just over time don't need them anymore. If you ever look at a python, like a large, one of those 13-foot pythons, if you look towards the back by the tail, you will see 2 tiny little, same things, those vestigial legs. They're almost like little spurs. And just over time, they've just shrunk and they're completely useless. They just have them. So it's kind of cool that over time they would just lose them. They just simply, they're not useful anymore. And it's too much energy to keep producing those extra limbs. And so that energy has gone elsewhere. I had another one here. Hellbenders, I did not know are called snot otters and old lasagna sides. Weird, but true. That is really cool. Does a salamander feel like a sea cucumber or a sponge or a fish? Ooh, good question. The way that I describe salamanders when I do programs are like Jello. So if you ever have like touched Jello before, it's very smooth, it's wet, it's slimy. It is not bumpy usually at all. They're just very smooth and slimy and wet and cold. All right. I used to live in Central Illinois. When I was little, we used to find black ones with yellow spots. I never see them anymore. Yes, unfortunately, a lot of the salamander species, their habitats have been degraded or fragmented. They are losing a lot of wetland areas. There's a lot of drought happening, which is right now. So there's a lot of reasons why our salamanders, we just don't see a lot of them anymore. All right, so let's talk a little bit about physical characteristics. How do they eat? So salamanders are what we call opportunistic. They will eat anything that moves and anything that fits in their mouth. Mostly they are carnivorous. There is those few animals that we talked about, that will eat plant material that's been observed eating plant material. Otherwise, it's snails, insects, larvae, slugs, other amphibians. Sometimes they can exhibit cannibalism. That is not weird, especially our, in Nebraska, our tiger salamanders, they will exhibit a lot of cannibalism oftentimes. So the terrestrial salamanders, they have really sticky tongues, but don't think of like a frog tongue or a chameleon. It doesn't shoot out and it's not the length of their body. It's very small, but it's sticky. And that helps them pull that food into their mouth to move down their throat. And then the aquatic salamanders, they simply grab onto their prey with their teeth and then shake their heads around wildly, but they do not have that sticky tongue. They also, a lot of people ask, do they have teeth? So yes, kind of. They're one of the few species of animals where the larva will also have teeth. So a baby frog, for instance, a tadpole does not, but a tadpole salamander will. So when prey is struggling, if once they caught, let's say a cricket, they have it in their mouth, they have these teeth tips that will relax in the front and basically guide that prey down the throat of the salamander so that they cannot escape. Many species of salamanders will have teeth attached to something called the vomer and the palatine bones, which basically helps them hold their prey. They do not chew like you and I think that teeth should work. So it's not going to be like a dog or a cat or a cow or anything like that. It's simply to hold the prey and move it down the mouth. All right, so where do they live? They live all over the world. The United States has the largest number of different salamander families. All of them except the family that Hinobiidae, those Asiatic salamanders, the giant ones, they are found here in the United States. It also depends on what type of salamander it is. So is it one that is arboreal? Is it one that is a fully aquatic? Is it one that is semi-burrowing? There's a lot of different places that salamanders can live. So no matter the species, they all have to live by some form of water. So they start in the water and they lay their offspring in the water. There are 16 species that live solely in caves. And over time, they have adapted to this total darkness lifestyle. They have very pale skin. They have greatly reduced eyes. In Nebraska, both of our salamanders, they will live in either permanent or semi-permanent bodies of water. They could live by the edges of woodlands. They also have small permanent wetlands, and then crayfish burrows are very important to them as well. All right, so speaking of those cave dwelling species, this one, you're either very familiar with axolotls or you've never heard of it. So an axolotl, the Aztecs had this god called an axolotl, and it was the god of fire and lightning. And basically the story goes that he disguised himself as a salamander to avoid being sacrificed. So the name kind of stuck. So axolotls, they have this ability to regenerate lost limbs. and they can basically stay young forever. These salamanders, they never undergo metamorphosis, so they never ever go into adulthood. They never grow out of their larval stage, so we call that neotenic. The feathery gills that you see here, those pink feather things, those are always on the body, but they do have functioning lungs and they can breathe through their skin. They also have this like super all the time, this like permanent upturned smile. So they're very cute. A lot of people have them as pets in the pet trade. They basically suck in their prey. They eat mollusks, insect eggs, small fish, crustaceans. The wild ones that you will find in the caves of Mexico, they're usually a grayish brown color. But in the pet trade, they specifically bred them over time to be white with the pink gills. So if you ever have one as a pet, this is what you would get. These guys are crazy cool. They have a lot of different adaptations about them. I mentioned earlier that they have that ability to regenerate lost limbs. Well, it's not just limbs. They can also regenerate their heart. They can regenerate their spinal cord and even parts of their own brain. So think about that from a biological standpoint, is how important are these animals to study and understand how they can do that. So they're huge interest as far as the biology world, and a lot of people want them as pets. So unfortunately, these animals have suffered a huge harvest loss. A lot of people want them as pets. People want them for research. So there's not very many wild ones left. There's a kind of a weird estimation. We're not sure, but we think some people say there's 50 to about 1,000, maybe 3,000 wild axolotls left. That's not very many. So they're found in Mexico in kind of these inland caves area. And then for reproduction, the males will get the interest of a female by doing something called a hula dance, which basically they shake their tail and they shake their lower body. And females can lay up to 1,000 eggs at a time. There is a theory why they never change into adults. That's kind of a big question here. Many scientists believe that because their lakes never dry up, they've never had to trade those aquatic traits to become terrestrial. So they've always had the ability to have water, and there's no need for them to put forth that energy into metamorphosing into an adult. All right, so how do salamanders reproduce? It's very different between species. Most species in the United States will usually start reproducing and looking for a mate in the spring. So right now, after the first rain, I don't know about you, but we haven't seen a lot of rain here in Nebraska. So this is something that could be a problem in the spring. The peak time of reproduction is between March and April. So these, both the aquatic and terrestrial groups will mate and breed underwater. So no matter if they're terrestrial or if they're aquatic, they will breed underwater. Most species internalize or fertilize internally, but there are quite a few that have external fertilization as well. Both the males will find potential females just simply by approaching them and blocking their path, saying, hey, I would like to mate with you. If they are external fertilization, the female will usually let the male know she's ready to mate by touching her nose to his tail. And he will deposit a spermatophore, usually like on a leaf or the bottom of a pond or something. And then the male will actually drag the female over that spermatophore so that she will pick it up and put it in her cloaca. Her cloaca is like the area for the common chamber, basically is what it's called, for the intestinal, the urinary, and genital tract. So salamanders, frogs, reptiles, birds, monotremes all have that. And basically what then will happen is she will fertilize those eggs. Some species, they lay just the larva, they have that live birth. Some species will protect their eggs, some species will not. It just, again, depends on the type of salamander and where they are living. All right, life cycle. Most salamanders will lay shell-less eggs. They're very jelly-like in appearance in temporary bodies of water. Usually small ponds that form after that snow melt and the spring rains. So again, at least most of our state in Nebraska is undergoing a severe drought right now. So we don't know what that's going to look like as far as salamanders this year. And one of the major things that needs to happen is that they need to lay their eggs in fishless ponds, because fish are huge predators. They will not only eat the eggs, but they will also eat the breeding salamanders. The eggs will then develop into those larvae. In favorable conditions, the larva will develop into an adult if they choose to. In unfavorable conditions, such as really high heat, drought, lack of food, they can remain aquatic. So again, they can retain those gills if they see that the conditions are not favorable for them to turn into an adult. The larvae are often carnivorous, and the development time just simply depends on the species. Sometimes it's 2 weeks, sometimes it's 5 months. All right, so metamorphosis just simply means change. So it basically means to go an abrupt and thorough change in the animal's biochemistry and physiology as far as going from a young juvenile into an adult. So there's a complete transformation oftentimes that happens. And how does this happen? It's hormones. So hormones in the animal will trigger it to go from that aquatic stage or their juvenile stage to the adult stage. Skin will thicken, their caudal fin will be absorbed. Sometimes if they are that species, the gills will be absorbed and the gill slits close, the lungs will develop, the eyelids, if they have them, the tongue, the teeth develop. One thing that's really different as far as a frog toad versus a salamander, they have this thing, the mesonephric kidney, which is basically just a rudimentary kidney that does what it needs to do. It will completely change and undergo a process to go from a pronephric kidney. So instead of excreting just a very dilute amount of ammonia, it will go from a large concentrated urea. So that's very different. That's how you know if it's a male or if it's a adult versus a juvenile salamander. All right, so defense. They don't have claws. They're often small. What do they do to defend themselves? Well, we talked about some of them are very brightly colored. This is one that's called a red eft. This one's highly toxic. They experience this aposematism, which means bright colors and patterns means, hey, I'm toxic, just letting you know. They often produce these really bad or bitter, poisonous tasting skin secretions. Most animals know that if they try this once and they see an animal die, or if they taste really bad, they usually leave something that looks like this alone in the future. So species have figured this out, and there's a lot of animals that will mimic different poisonous animals. So this is the red eft, and there's another species of salamander that looks fairly like it. And so a lot of animals know, okay, this means brightly colored. I need to leave this animal alone. Very similar, you will see this in things like monarch butterflies and also like poison dart frogs. The brighter the color, the usually more toxic those animals are. There are also some salamanders that will use autotomy. So what does that mean? They will break off parts of their body, which is usually their tail, and they can reabsorb it, and they will oftentimes then regrow it. So this distraction will, it will wiggle around for a while, distracting the predator so that prey, that salamander can get away. Oftentimes they can regenerate or regrow their tails. Sometimes if they lose toes, they can do this too. Depending on the species, depends on how long it takes them to regrow it. All right, so this is called caudal autotomy, which just means their tail and it breaks off. So these muscles around the tail, what happens is when they drop it, they will contract around it and then that artery so that they will not bleed to death. There's oftentimes skin flaps over the fold at that site to minimize those infections so the animal doesn't die. Sometimes salamanders, if they're mating or trying for territory or girls, they will purposely bite the tail of another male and break it off, because then he loses his appeal. So other females will not want to mate with him. This is super costly. So dropping their tail is like their last resort. This is either do or die. So it's very costly. Not only is it a lot of energy to regrow that tail, but it weakens your immune system. Your tail is a huge role in how you move, and a lot of your fat reserves are in a tail. So oftentimes when salamanders or lizards can do this. They drop their tail. It's their last resort. Oftentimes that regeneration is like the high priority once it's dropped. And oftentimes they will put other things aside. So their body growth, their interspecies connections, they put that on the back burner because their main focus is regrowing that tail. All right, and then cutaneous respiration. So how do they breathe? Some animals like those lungless salamanders, this is the only way that they can breathe. So they lack lungs, and there's this countercurrent exchange where basically the blood that circulates through the skin will go in the opposite direction of the absorbing oxygen and surrounding water. So this will basically take place of in water or in air. And it basically, they need a moist barrier. So if you ever touch a salamander, they're gonna be moist because that water needs to go into the animal and absorb it. And then the bad gases like carbon dioxide need to expel from that animal. All right, so where are we as far as a conservation status on these animals? Many amphibians. Amphibians are probably one of the most threatened groups of animals as far as in the world. The IUCN, which is the International Union for Conservation of Nature, lists hundreds of species on either the red list of threatened as being like a highly concerned. There's some on the vulnerable list. There's a few that are endangered or critically endangered. There's a lot that we have no data for either. So they could be extinct before we even figure out that they're a species. Why are they doing this? What's happening to salamanders? A lot of times it is their habitat is gone, it's degraded, it's fragmented. They simply just don't have anywhere to go anymore. Also, climate change is a huge portion as well. Salamanders are a cool water species. They like cooler areas. It's getting warmer and warmer and warmer, and they just don't have those places to go anymore. Also, invasive species, disease, the pet trade is a huge thing. Any small endangered fish, reptiles and amphibians, butterflies, insects are all on the pet trade, and a lot of people are just snatching them out of the wild, and there's none left to repopulate. All right, that was a lot of information. I have just two more slides that I want to talk to you about what we have here in Nebraska. And then let me see if I have any questions here. Any thoughts on why North America has the most variety of salamanders? We usually don't have the most diversity of things. That is very true. Good point, Sarah. So she's talking about like if you go to the rainforest, it's a huge diversity. A lot of people actually compare diversity on a prairie to diversity in a rainforest because there's so many species. My thing with salamanders is that they just need that more cooler environment. So the farther south that you get, the hotter it gets, and they just need those places to live that are just a little bit cooler. So what scientists have also found is that they're shifting their ranges north because it is getting so warm. Salamanders are moving to areas that are cooler. So that's my theory about why the United States has kind of a huge diversity. Pet trade. I've heard Nebraska salamanders that stay in the neonatal stage are called Mudpuppies. Is this correct? So no. So we do not have Mudpuppies here in Nebraska. They're a totally different species than things like our barred tiger salamanders. The ones that stay in that neonatal stage or that retain their juvenile characteristics, we don't have those. So in Nebraska, they can do it for a while, but eventually they're going to have to change into an adult. The ones that are able to do that, like true Mudpuppies, they can stay in that stage for their entire life. They never have to go into an adulthood. All right, I think that's it. Okay, I just have a couple more slides that I want to show you about what we have here in Nebraska. So we have the most common one is our barred tiger salamander. This is found throughout the state. If you notice this photo here, this is the same species, but they have very different colorings and patterns. So there's two variants. In the southern portion of Nebraska, they're going to have very vibrant yellow bars. So which is like this top one that you see. Their average length is about 6 to 8 inches. But then in the panhandles or the sandhills, I guess, the western area, you might get more spots or kind of a reticulated pattern. These are also both yellow. Not always will they be yellow. Sometimes they'll be like that dark army green color. I've seen some that are often kind of a shade of blue, very light colored green. They're all the same species, but they're just very different in where you find them because of their habitat. The best place to find salamanders is the sandhills. You have all those lakes and ponds that come up over time when it rains, and that's perfect habitat for our salamanders. So they're found in permanent, semi-permanent bodies of water. They love prairie dog burrows. This is a great place for them to hibernate during the winter. When it's really hot, they will sit in under there. Prairie dogs are ecological superheroes, so they have a lot of species that depend on them. Tiger salamanders is one. These guys are mostly nocturnal. They breed in the spring, and then once they hatch, the larvae become voracious predators. Oftentimes, these are one species that will cannibalize, especially in a very small pond. Basically, they just run into each other all the time, and one salamander just says, okay, I'm done with this, and just starts eating everything. And he will then, or she will then be the only salamander left because they just got tired of dealing with the competition. All right, and then we also have the smallmouth salamander. So this is our smallest salamander. They only grow about 4 to 5.5 inches. They're not as brightly colored. They're kind of like that olive, speckleish, green, brown color. Their head looks super small for the rest of their body. So if you're like, I'm not really sure which one is, the head is a distinguishing characteristic. The limbs and toes are very short. The tiger salamander, they're a little bit longer. These guys are found in a very diverse amount of habitat, woodlands, wet prairies, even a ditch. The earliest amphibians are these guys. So between our frogs and our toads and our salamanders, this guy is the earliest one to emerge after winter. It's been very warm here, at least in Lincoln. They could even be out right now. Only found in the extreme southeastern portion of Nebraska. So if you looked at a map of Nebraska and looked at Richardson County, and then the next 3 counties up along the Missouri River, that is where they have a range. So it's a very, very small range. All right, so I'm gonna check the chat. I'm glad I opened people's minds to salamanders. There's a lot to learn about them. I don't see any more questions, so I'm gonna stop sharing. Actually, I lied. I'm gonna do that really quick. I'm gonna share my screen. This is our last Science Of. So I do want everyone to know that we will start again in July. We're gonna start with bats and do some crayfish and edible plants, raptors, beetles, night sky ecology. So lots of cool new things. So mark your calendars for July 7th. We will start again, same time, 3 to 4 p.m. on Thursdays. Again, if that time does not work for you, we will record them like all of them and put them on our YouTube channel. And then if you liked this, if this was your first Science Of, like I said, we will record them, put them on our YouTube channel under that playlist Science Of. And then we have a Facebook page, we have an Instagram page, and then we have our just general Nebraska wildlife education website as well. All right, so thank you everyone. If this was your first, if this was your 6th one, I appreciate you taking your time out of your day to listen to these. And for everyone that registered today, I will be sending you like a follow-up email saying thank you, here's some cool websites and information about salamanders, and then also the link to the video that you can watch on YouTube and the evaluation as well. And if you fill out an evaluation for us on SurveyMonkey, we'll be sending you some swag. And so we really appreciate you helping us improve our program. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing because I know you don't wanna see me. I know you wanna see the salamanders. So I brought some salamanders today, a salamander. I brought a barred tiger salamander. I'm gonna go ahead and get him out here. His name is Dale. Dale, I know it's not very creative, but so this guy is a mole salamander in that group. And he is a barred tiger salamander. So the most common type of salamander that you will find, at least here in Nebraska. You can see this very large tail. It is fairly flattened on top. You can see there's no claws on this animal. I know it's hard to see. Let's see if I can spotlight my video here for all of you. There we go. If you look at his face, it looks very frog-like, him moving his chin up and down. He's breathing. This guy is one of those that is that kind of more spotted pattern than the barred. So if you remember, which section did he come from in Nebraska? He also is not yellow. He is kind of that army green, light colored color. And I think he's about 3 years old. They can live to be about 20, which is fairly long for an amphibian. But I did want to show you since it's our last science of, and I actually have one of these animals to show you. So very cute. Very cool animals. Hopefully you will be seeing some of them in the spring when it rains this weekend. We're crossing our fingers. But again, thank you for coming to our Science of. And if you have any questions, I'll stick around for a couple more minutes. But otherwise, thank you. And we hope to see you in July. So thanks, everyone. I hope you like Dale. I can send a photo of him through the email as well in case you missed him. So thank you, everyone. Awesome. Well, we will see you all in July. Have a great week, everyone. Bye.